Hello, this is Emlyn and Jada with another episode of Stories Behind the Scrubs. On this podcast, we interview medical professionals in order to get a better idea of what it is they do and why they do it. We also listen as they tell us their story, recounting how they chose to go into medicine. On today's episode of Stories Behind the Scrubs, we're going to be talking to oncologist Dr. Elizabeth Horenkamp. Starting with high school and ending with her current career, Dr. Horenkamp walks us through the decisions she made and how they impacted her journey through college, medical school, and even the Air Force.
Okay, so I'm Jada and this is Emlyn. It's really nice to finally meet you. So do you just want to go ahead and get started?
Sure, absolutely.
Since we're in high school right now, we figured we'd kind of start there. So we were wondering just kind of where you grew up and where you went to high school and what it was like for you.
So I grew up in Freehold, New Jersey, Central Jersey. You guys probably aren't old enough to be big Bruce Springsteen fans, but it was Bruce Springsteen's hometown. So that was the only specific fancy thing about where I grew up. I went to Catholic high school. And in high school, I did have an inkling that I wanted to do something medical wise. And that probably had a lot to do with the fact that my mom is a nurse and actually got her nurse practitioner license while I was still in high school. So she was going through a lot of the same things that I would eventually go through at the time when I was starting to think about what I wanted to do. And that surely had a big influence on what I wanted to do.
And so what year in high school do you think it was that you really decided medicine was the path you were going to pursue?
Um, I think I probably had an inkling even before high school, again, just because I was exposed to it a lot with my mom in the home, being a nurse and getting her schooling. So I think I probably even thought about it before high school. I know that she and I talked about there being a lot of different paths in medicine. Obviously, you guys are thinking about that as you're doing your podcast. My dad's an electrical engineer, so we talked about biomedical engineering. We talked about, she actually told me that she didn't want me to be a nurse because she thought I was too bossy, and I would have to be a doctor if I was going to go into be either a nurse or a doctor. So she said I couldn't be a nurse, so that ruled that out right away. And then we talked about like biomedical engineering with that. Kind of combine both of what my parents were doing. But I think I'm a people person, and I don't think designing machines, even if they were eventually going to help people, was something that I was going to like all that much. So medicine is what we talked about. And when I was looking for colleges, I did look for a college that had a good pre-medicine program. And I took, sciences that I was required. My school didn't have a lot of options. So, I did well in the science classes and just went through the regular curriculum.
That's really interesting. You had said you went to a Catholic college. Would you say this impacted your any of the classes that you took or any of your opportunities, or was it a similar to experience?
So I went to Catholic high school, and so did my next younger brother, and then my youngest brother went to a public high school. And my kids I have 4 children. They all went to public high school. I don't think it drastically changed what my options were. I do think that my little brother that went to public high school had a few more options when he went through school, just in terms of slightly different things. Like, we didn't have any wood shop or techie classes, or even home ec kind of stuff in my school, because it was a little bit smaller. And obviously we had more religion than he did when he was in high school. So I don't know that set me back at all when I got to college, but it's something I noticed.
So it sounds like you kind of knew pretty early on, like while you were in high school, that you were interested in medicine. And like your mom had said, she was you kind of had your parents pulling you towards different paths. But individually, would you say that you were a good student?
Yes, yeah, I was. I was always a very good student, and that was certainly something that I defined myself on early on, even in elementary school. I cared about my schoolwork, and I was fairly self-motivated to get good grades. So it wasn't something they had to stress with me about it.
And then moving from high school to your college experience, I mean, so first off, where did you go to college? And then the second question would be, what do you think the biggest difference was for you between high school and college?
So I went to college at a small college near where I live right now in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, called Franklin and Marshall College. It was something one of my guidance counselors had recommended because I was interested in medicine, and they, particularly offered a guided kind of pre-med program with a specific pre-med advisor. And I think that it's probably gotten even more challenging to go to medical school now. And so I think if you're thinking about that, it is helpful to have that advice. I have had now the experience not only of applying to medical school, but watching one of my children apply to medical school. So I'll tell you that there is a lot of things that if you're going to do it in a short period of time, that thinking about it early on in college is pretty important. I think going back to high school just for a minute, one of the other pieces of advice that someone gave us, not when I was in high school, but when my kids were in high school and getting ready to apply to college, was to, print out a few college applications when you're a freshman or a sophomore, just to see what kind of questions they ask, and just make sure that as you're going through your high school career, that, you're developing some answers to those questions that sound helpful. I think that's what having a pre-med advisor at my college was helpful with. They made sure that there wasn't any surprises when I was a senior about, oh my gosh, you had all, these classes that you didn't think about, or these experiences you didn't try to get before you applied to med school. So I think that was very helpful. I have known in my career lots of people that, finished college doing something very different than medicine, and then eventually went back and have been very successful practitioners. But if that's the direction that you're heading, you just hate to get derailed for an extra year or two. It's a very long process. So.
Yeah. Um, and I was just kind of wondering, like, what do you think is the most important thing for med schools to incorporate in their teachings? Like, what should we look for when we're looking at applying to medical school?
Oh, yeah. So, again, I'm going to draw on both my experience as well as, what I've seen my daughter go through now. And I think that one of the most important things as a physician now that may have been different, even when I was starting to think about medicine, was there is too much to know. There's no way that you can know everything that you need to know to take care of a patient. So teaching people not necessarily how to memorize things, but how to approach things, and how to continue learning as you go through. Again, because I think it's just unrealistic of any of us that we can expect that we have everything a patient needs when we see them in the office. So, listen to how they teach you. And if they're just making you memorize things and they don't have a philosophy about how they're teaching you to learn, I think that would be something that would raise a red flag for me.
That's some really great advice. What would you say, what kind of skills in high school did you carry over to college that helped you to become successful?
I would say I was really involved in stuff when I was in high school. I was in the marching band on the drill team, and I was in the track team in the spring, and I had some other after school activities. I was in a Med Explorer club, and I actually practiced karate when I was in high school. So I think I learned a lot about time management when I was in high school, in that, I went from school to practice to doing my homework, waiting for somebody to pick me up, to have dinner, to go to my karate class and come home and go to bed. And I think that things get very busy in college. And if you don't have some kind of, self system about how to get your work done and get the other things done, it's going to be a very difficult transition to college. Jada had said earlier, kind of what was the biggest difference between high school and college? I think it was that I was like, wait a minute, I only have 2 hours of classes a day. What am I going to do with the rest of the day? Oh my gosh, I have so much free time. But absolutely not. So there was so much more, reading that I had to do the class was just to go over what I'd already learned myself. And if you don't have a way to kind of structure your time and get things done before you go to college, and you're like, oh, I got 2 hours of class a day, I got all this extra time, there's going to be a big problem.
So adding on to Emily's question, what skills did you learn in college that helped you be successful that like you hadn't had before?
Um, so my time management skills got even better. I was thinking about this obviously before I signed on today. And one of the things that I think I didn't expect about being a doctor that I think everybody should expect now is that in addition to not knowing everything, I can't do everything that my patients need. And so when I take care of a patient, I'm really just leading a team of people that are helping me take care of a patient. I have a patient care assistant, I have a nurse, I have a social worker, I have a navigator, I have people that are getting things authorized, I have people that are getting things scheduled. And in college, I was a captain of the track team my junior and senior years, and that was something that I really enjoyed. And I was not at all the best person on the team, but I always like to tell my kids I was really good at leading the jumping jacks. And so since I could lead the jumping jacks, like I could kind of get everybody moving in the right direction. And I found that, even though I was not scoring that many points for the team, just getting everybody kind of ready for the meet was a very helpful thing for me to do. And, I find that's true every day now as a doctor. I don't know exactly everything that needs to be done, but I try to make sure that I'm engaging the other people that are helping me and make sure they understand the importance of what it is that I'm asking them to do for my patient, even if they don't really even get to see the patient. It's important that they understand, what their work means towards taking care of a patient. So that kind of leadership was helpful. I also lived in a house with 7 other women that was not a sorority, that we rented ourselves. And I ended up being there the summer before we moved in when my other roommates weren't there yet. And so kind of thought about how to organize so it wasn't just a complete disaster. And we actually had a great house experience. I thought as a junior and senior, we lived together and we ate together Monday through Sunday through Thursday, and everybody took turns cooking, everybody took turns shopping, everybody had a cleaning role that they had to do. And, we had two big parties a year that we all got together and organized. And I really enjoyed that, organizing and kind of getting people moving towards a goal. So I think that was something that I knew a little bit about from high school, but I thought I got better at it in college. And then, then I went to classes too. Yeah. But I'd have to say that so little of what I learned, especially in my pre-med requirements, are things that I think, oh gosh, thank heavens I learned that because I'm using it every day. I should have taken a lot more English classes and sociology classes and psychology classes. My daughter, who's in medical school now, is a psychology major. I thought that was genius, because she, a lot of what I do as a physician, at least in my job, is have to work with people, and so understanding psychology. I didn't take any psychology classes, and I really wish I had.
So, while you were in college, what was your major, and what would you say were some of your most difficult classes?
So I was a chemistry major in college, and that's one of the things that I enjoyed it. I actually, it's funny because everybody's like, "Oh my God, you're a chemistry major. That's so hard." I was like, "Thank heavens I wasn't like, a major in sociology or something where I had to write papers." Like I found that very difficult. I liked a test and a set of problems to work through, and so I found that a relatively, I wouldn't say it was an easy major, but I found it easier to master than, a lot of the pre-med students who were biology majors. That was a lot of memorization, and I just really didn't enjoy that. Paper writing, I would have to say that writing a paper was not something that I got probably enough of in high school, and I was very intimidated by that. And so if I had a major where that was the focus of all of my classes, I would have found that more difficult. Although I think that's unfortunate because again, I think that maybe would have come out of college a slightly better rounded person if I'd felt more comfortable taking classes that involved more paper writing and that kind of research. Um, so I majored in chemistry and I enjoyed it, but I have to say again, like it's funny, I've actually seen some of my chemistry professors now that I'm back in the same town that I went to college in, and I'm just like, you wouldn't be proud of of what I remember from being a chemistry major. Um, the probably some of the hardest classes that I think people have to take to get into medical school um, is organic chemistry. So, if you talk to people that are thinking about going to medical school, that's like kind of a hurdle that people have to get over. Is you have to get through organic chemistry because it's a prerequisite. And I think people either like it, like I did, or find it incredibly hard. If I had to take a philosophy course to get into medical school, I'm not sure I would have got into medical school. I think that's unfortunate because I don't think organic chemistry thinking defines whether people can be a good doctor or not. For some areas of medicine, that is pretty important to understand that. I'm not sure that even what I do, giving chemotherapy and such, that a really thorough understanding of organic chemistry makes me a better or worse doctor. I think you have to have some understanding of it, but if that's the thing that's going to make you not go to medical school, I would say just get through it.
That's a really interesting perspective. Before we move on to your medical school experience, I was just wondering, how did you prepare for the MCAT, and what was your experience with that test?
It's funny. Again, it's interesting. I've been thinking about it just because watching my daughter do that. I don't remember that we prepared that much for the MCAT. I took it. I took my classes all around the time right before I took the MCATs, and so I think I must have had a book or something, but I don't remember there being a specific period of time where I took time out to get ready for the MCATs. But my daughter did. And spent a lot of time studying before that. Because I think unfortunately now everybody does. And so the scores, have kind of gone. It's just like the SATs, right? Nobody took SAT courses when I was going to college. Like everybody, you have to. All my kids did too, to kind of get in the same bracket as people that do. So from my daughter's experience, taking some kind of learning experience or taking some weeks out to make sure that you've mastered the skills that you have to have recently enough to test on them for the MCATs was pretty important. And I know she took some structured weeks out and had some workbooks from people that had done it before. She didn't take a specific course, but used a bunch of online materials plus some study books. And I think she took like 6 weeks where she was, working part-time as a lifeguard, but spent a lot of her time studying to get ready for those. So
Yeah, so I think we're gonna move on to med school now. So on your CV, it said that you went to the University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine. Um, so what was your experience in med school like? And kind of the same question as before, but what was the difference between your undergrad experience and your med school experience?
um so I think that again there was a lot of self-directed stuff that I was glad that I'd already learned time management in college and had a sense of how I learned, so that I could work on mastering the materials. The way that I went to med school, we were in a classroom with a bunch of classes. I think I had more time in classrooms in med school than I did in college, which was a little strange. And we did a few other things like anatomy and had some classes where we started physical exam. We were, when I went to school, like learning the softer side of being a doctor, talking to patients and, being comfortable with difficult conversations. I think that that was just kind of starting to be a thing. So we had we had some like seminars on that and, kind of play acting stuff. But I think that's a much bigger part of medical curriculum now, which is good, because that is a lot of what you do as a doctor, is having to, interact with people and not just handle medical facts, but handle the way people handle medical facts and handle the way you teach people about what their diseases are and why you're asking them to do the things that you're doing. So I'm glad to see that in my daughter's medical school experience, that's been a bigger part of what she's doing. There was a lot of memorizing, which I didn't enjoy. There was no more chemistry problems. It was memorizing drug names and body parts and diseases and different things. So it was a very quick period of time where we had to learn a lot of stuff, some of which I'd heard before, but very little of which I'd had in any kind of depth. And we did that for almost 2 years. And then we had a small break, and then you start clinical rotations. And that's really when medical school gets fun. So for the last 2 or 2.5 years of medical school, you are actually, have a white coat and scrubs on. You're in the hospital and, the most junior member of a team of people that are actually taking care of patients. And you're touching people and you're examining people and you're talking to people. And you're just kind of shadowing what the people that already have an MD do, but kind of really getting involved in the work of taking care of people. Although most of that experience is centered on hospitalized people, which is very different than what I do day to day. Even in my medicine training, which maybe we'll get to next, you do a lot of time taking care of people in the hospital and just a little bit of time taking care of people in the office. And I spend, 10% of my time in the hospital now and 90% of my time in the office. So there's still, even after medical school and all of my training, there was still a lot of learning to do in terms of how I did that kind of interaction.
So medical school is obviously very time consuming and it requires a lot of attention, and it's pretty expensive. So what would you say you did to get the most out of your time spent in medical school?
So I got a scholarship, and that was that ended up being a good thing. And it was I didn't exactly do it on purpose. I left college with a boyfriend, and he was also going to medical school, and he had a scholarship through the Air Force to go to medical school. He had family that had been in the military, and so for him, I think that was something that didn't seem very foreign to him. I don't have any family that had been in the military, and so what had never crossed my mind that would be something that I would do. When we ended up going to medical school together, I was just like, wait a minute, that's stupid. If I'm, paying with my parents for my medical school education, and I'm going to end up following, he's now my husband of 30 years. I'm going to end up following you around to Air Force bases, and I will have paid for my education. So I applied and got an Air Force scholarship to medical school. So they paid for the last 3 years of my medical school education. For my husband, David, and I, it ended up being a great deal. They paid for everything through medical school, and we got a small stipend as well. And then we ended up being active duty military people, me for 9 years and him for 11 years after medical school, and came out with almost no debt because of that. Yeah, so that was a really big deal. For us, it worked out great. We were both in the Air Force. We managed kind of our training schedules such that we did not get separated. Air Force comes first, wife comes second. And so we made some adjustments in the things that we wanted to make sure that we could stay together. But that was a big deal for us. And medical school is incredibly expensive now. I'm hoping that at some time in the future that's going to adjust, because there are some doctors that are making plenty to make up for that pretty quickly, but there's not that many anymore. To go into medicine because you want to make money is not going to be a good idea by the time you guys get to medical school age, I think, because you're going to finally pay down the debts that you incurred by the time you retire if you're going to go into a primary care specialty, unfortunately. So I made sure that I wanted to be there. I think that would be the answer to that question. I was there for a reason. I think there were not a ton of people that I went to college with that were going to college because that's what you did after high school, and they didn't really have a goal or motivation to be there. I would say that there were very few people in my medical school class that I felt like were, checking a box by coming to medical school. People were there to like learn stuff because this is what we were going to do with the rest of our lives. And people that, went through the first month or two and were like, wow, this really isn't very interesting, were gone after a couple months because it wasn't worth the time or the money or the aggravation to do it. So
Yeah, about your experience in the Air Force, how did you manage those two? Because they both appear to be really big life experiences, medical school plus residency, of course, and being in the branch of the military.
it was interesting because that's kind of what we were doing. And since my husband and I, Dave, were both doing it, it didn't seem that odd. The military did a pretty good job of kind of integrating. I was wearing a uniform and doing what some other people were doing. So, Dave had a 4-year scholarship. And so the summer before we went to medical school, he didn't have a job for very long. He had to go to officer training for 6 weeks before we went to medical school. And then between first and second year during the summer, I worked only for a short period of time and then went to officer training school between my first and second year. When we were medical students, we were required to do 6 weeks a year in uniform, but doing rotations as medical students. The military has a medical school as well and has a lot of training programs. So I just did what I was doing at medical school, but I did it in a uniform. The things that were interesting about that I hadn't expected were that, in addition to being a doctor, I had to learn to be an officer, which is a leadership role. And, I certainly look back on that now. I mentioned to you that I thought being a leader is an important characteristic. And I certainly got more leadership training through medical school and my residency because I was also having to be a military officer at the same time. So I think that was actually really helpful. The population that we took care of when I left medical school, the Air Force took David and I both for residency. So I did all of my training in uniform as well. You're not just taking care of active duty people, you take care of all the retirees as well. The area of medicine that I didn't then get exposed to was people that didn't have the ability to pay for care because everything was paid for everyone who we took care of. So that is something that I think I probably still struggle a little bit with more than other people. People would drive to the Air Force Base to get free Tylenol when I was a resident. So there really wasn't anybody. You sometimes had to wait a while to get the stuff that you wanted, but there wasn't anybody that didn't have any means to pay for or get the things that they needed. Like I said, the Air Force didn't generally make it totally convenient for people, but it wasn't like they couldn't get it done. And otherwise, like I was a resident, like I said, I had to wear a uniform. I had to put my hat on after I got out of my hat and after I got out of my car and salute people walking in and not have anything in my right hand. It took me about 3 months after taking off the uniform to stop doing that, looking for my hat and shifting everything to my left hand in case I had to salute somebody walking in. But there wasn't a lot that was different. I was a staff physician in the Air Force for 3 years. There was some extra training, which was, it was interesting. I had to go out in our camouflage uniforms and learn about what would happen if we got deployed, which we didn't. Which is different now. I think everybody ends up being a doctor overseas somewhere now if you stay in the military. So for us, it ended up being a very good experience. I think when I've talked to young women, especially about that experience, I was very fortunate in that my significant other was in the military, in the same branch of the military, and we were able to kind of coordinate our moves. I think it is challenging if you have a significant other that maybe is not in the military or in a different branch of the military or has a job that's not really very portable. Because I did know some other women that I trained with, and there was a good number of women in my training program. I didn't feel like it was male heavy at all. But the women that had husbands that had jobs that were not if you were a teacher or a nurse, jobs more traditionally assigned to women, it was pretty easy to get a job wherever you went. But if you were a chemical engineer, not necessarily were you going to find a job where the Air Force wanted your significant other to be. And I think that was a difficult thing for some people's marriage. So there are a lot of things to think about when deciding to do something like that, because you don't get to decide where you're going for all of the time that you're in the Air Force. You have some choices, but your kind of path isn't your own.
So that was actually really interesting, because I've been considering the option of going through the Navy for and becoming a physician through the Navy. So it was actually really good to hear your experiences from the Air Force. But I think we're going to move into your residency, which you said that you did with the Air Force. And I noticed that your residency was for internal medicine. And so I kind of had a question on what internal medicine was. So my understanding is that's kind of general medicine and more geared towards adults, whereas pediatricians are geared towards children. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think that when we were in medical school, when you were applying for, so the first year out of medical school, everybody's an intern. That's what they call your first year of training. And there were only a few tracks, internship tracks and so you had to decide before you got out of medical school if you were going to do surgery, if you were going to do adult medicine, or if you're going to do pediatrics. Those were kind of the three general tracks. And then from surgery, most people already had some kind of idea whether they wanted to be a general surgeon, and they are the ones who are doing mostly abdominal operations. You want to be an orthopedic surgeon, bones, a head and neck surgeon, or an obstetrician gynecologist. And then pediatrics is kind of the same thing as medicine, but just for small people. And medicine is things that don't generally involve a knife and people being asleep. So all the other subspecialties flow out of internal medicine. And I think that that's something that most people had a feeling for by the end of medical school. We had enough experience doing things with our hands and figuring out whether we like to talk to people. I thought that was the major deciding factor for me. Surgery is very exciting. And when I was a medical student, I thought it was awesome. And it was, just to be in the operating room and to take somebody apart and put them back together again is just really remarkable. I thankfully had the experience of my husband, who is a surgeon. And when we were learning together, I figured out that I had no three-dimensional sense whatsoever. So when he was reading an anatomy textbook, I'm like, wait a minute, you understood that? Like, you know where that is? And he's like, yeah. And I was like, oh my gosh. So I figured out I couldn't be a surgeon. And he is a very good surgeon. So that was a good break for us. And he really doesn't like talking to people all that much, which is what I do all day. So that wouldn't have been a particularly good specialty for him. I really liked pediatrics for a while too. And then I realized that what I needed to do was just to have some children, not to take care of other people's children. So I started on internal medicine. But when I left medical school, I'd never done an oncology rotation. That's what I do now. And I remember distinctly saying to people like, well, that's the only thing I'm not going to do. There's no way I'm going to be a medical oncologist, because that would be awful. And that's what I do. So there's still a lot of room for figuring things out, after you figure out whether you want to use your hands or use your mind in medical school.
Yeah. So it sounds like you had a lot of interests in different specialties. What eventually pushed you to internal medicine and then oncology after that?
Yeah. So I made the decision at the end of medical school that internal medicine was the way to go. I wasn't good enough with my hands or my three-dimensional sense. I thought to be any kind of surgeon that was reasonable. I think from a lifestyle standpoint, that wasn't really what drove me, but I'm thankful now. Surgery is a lot of hurry up and wait and waking up in the middle of the night, and I don't think I would have been good at that. And I need more time to make decisions. So medicine is something that's usually more thoughtful, in terms of you take some information, you think about it and write it down and mix it up and then try to come up with it, as opposed to, something's bleeding in front of me and I need to like take care of it right now. I wouldn't be very good at that. So I went in internal medicine and I thought I would probably specialize, although I wasn't really very sure. I went into internal medicine thinking that I was going to really help people be well and do a lot of preventative care, and that was, I found, I don't know if it was a message from God, but all the people that I took care of like didn't want to be well. They wanted a pill, and I found that really very distressing. And I didn't feel like I was helping anybody, and I felt like nobody was listening to me. And then oncology patients listen to you. You kind of have their attention. So I had one particular patient that I actually took care of when I was a medicine resident that really kind of turned me on to the taking care of people that are really sick. He actually didn't have cancer. He had terrible congestive heart failure and bad kidney disease and bad lung disease. And he was really a mess when I met him. And he asked me to help him, and he looked like he really needed help. And we worked together, and I took care of him for about a year and a half and kept him out of the hospital. He wasn't well, but he was better. And I found that extremely gratifying. And I thought, okay, I need to take care of some sick people. And then I did an oncology rotation. I'm like, oh, here they are. Here's the really sick people. I should take care of these people. So that was what kind of led me into oncology, and certainly the people that I was around when I was training. I liked the oncologist. And when I did rotations there, I felt comfortable with them, and the way that they approached medicine, which was, it's very different between specialties, kind of what you're focusing on. And I thought, oh, yep, that's what I want to do.
So, as an oncologist, what would you say are your most common cases?
So, in terms of commonness of cancers, breast cancer is very common, given that I'm a woman. And when I joined the practice that I'm in right now, I was the only woman. And the practice I was in before that, when David was still in the military, I was the only woman. I saw a lot of breast cancer. Women tend to like to see women for breast cancer. So that was a large part of what I've always done. Lung cancer, colon cancer are very common problems as well. So I think we all see a lot of that. I am in a practice now with 10 oncologists, and given how difficult it is to remember everything that we need to know about all these different kind of specialties, we've started to try to subspecialize a little bit. So I am now doing mostly breast cancer, and then I also am our practice's lead for head and neck cancer, which is a completely different area of medicine, it feels like, than breast cancer. But again, pretty sick people. So it satisfies that criteria for me of the people that I like to take care of. I have a good friend who's a pediatric oncologist, which I was like, wow, I would really struggle with that. And she said, yeah, but I cure 85% of my patients. I was like, oh, wow, that's cool. I don't. So I think you really have to be comfortable. If you go into oncology to save people's lives, you're going to be disappointed a lot of the time, at least right now. I'm hoping that will change sometime in the next decade or two, that oncology will be something like pediatric oncology, where we're curing a lot of our patients. But right now we're doing a lot of, really palliative care, trying to improve the quality of people's life for whatever time they get left, sometimes by beating back their cancer with different medicines, and sometimes just by managing their symptoms better.
As a head and neck cancer specialist, what are some skills do you think are important to learn before going into this specialty, and especially taking on those types of challenges?
Yeah, again, I think you have to be ready to really talk to people and understand what is concerning them. I think you also, we ask people to do some very difficult things to try to cure them of their cancer, chemotherapy and radiation. I think if you just say to people, okay, you just need to do this, and I'm not going to tell you why, like it's not, why would they do this to themselves? Because, people can get very sick from the treatments that I'm offering. So I think as an oncologist, it's very important to be able to talk to people. I think it's very important to be able to listen to people. And understand what it is that they're trying to tell you that they want, or that they need, or that they're worried about. And, and keep that in mind when you're designing a treatment plan. I think you also have to be able to, color within the lines in terms of understanding, what's indicated and what's not, and being able to, to say to people, listen, I would like to help you, and I can make something up, but I'm not sure it's going to help you, because there's no data to support doing that, and you have to be able to to put that out there, and try to think about those kind of things too.
So my brother is actually a cancer survivor, and we spent quite a lot of time around pediatric oncologists, at least. And I was wondering, what do you think is like a defining trait or characteristic that separates the good oncologist from the great oncologist, or the excellent ones?
Oh, wow. So I think that, when I am the managing physician for my practice now. And so I am involved in interviewing oncologists to join my practice. And so that is something that I think about. I think people that try to, in an interview, just convince me that they're smart. I'm like, yeah, well, yeah, that's like that. That's the ticket. That's the admission ticket, right? Like, you can't not be smart and get through this. That's not what I want to hear about. I want to hear about, are you able to listen to people, and understand what their goals are, in addition to being smart enough to to then take their goals and make a treatment plan out of them. I also think that, again, you have to be able to work in a team environment, because if you think that you're going to be able to provide everything that your patient needs, you're not. Being able to delegate, because we're also actually being taken care of a lot of people, and if I try to do everything for each one of my patients, I would never sleep. I think those are probably the things that I think define an excellent oncologist. They have to be smart, because I think all of us are. I think they have to be able to understand what people are telling them, in terms of their goals, and even, especially older people won't tell you that unless you ask them. They're trained to do whatever the doctor says, no matter whether they think it's a terrible idea or not. And you have to be able to get the people around you to help you if you're really going to do the most for a patient.
Thank you for that. And I know research plays a really big part of, I know some people in college use it to get into medical school. And of course, it's just so crucial for advancing our knowledge. Have you been a part of any research? And if so, what was the research over?
That's a great question. I think that is, you're right. It's absolutely imperative to move science forward, that we're doing research. I think that, coming out of medical school and starting to think about my career, I didn't want to work in a lab, and I don't think I have the temperament for research. To that, I like the immediate gratification of working with a patient and making things better. I did do 3 months of, kind of lab bench research as a resident. No, sorry, an oncology fellow, where we worked with different cells and exposed them to things. And the lab that I was working in at University of Texas San Antonio, was working on insulin-like growth factor receptors on breast cancer cells. And in 3 months that I was there, I did a lot of things and shifted a lot of cells around. And I think that work has resulted in some, eventual stuff happening with looking at how we treat breast cancer. But I was like, wow, 3 months, and nobody got better. I found it challenging. So I think that I have a great admiration for the people that I work with at University of Pennsylvania that are involved in designing clinical trials and thinking about, things down to the receptor level and working in a lab with cells and discovering things. I don't think that's a different kind of doctor than the doctor that I wanted to be. And I think it is one of the things that people think about when they're in medical school. You have to know something about patients and you have to see some patients, but if you want to do academic medicine, and my colleagues we're a part of University of Pennsylvania now, my colleagues at University of Pennsylvania, they are not seeing clinic every day. They're doing a lot of clinical trials work, thinking about how to design clinical trials better, how to enroll people in clinical trials, looking at data, and a lot of their time where that is not, I listen to the results of clinical trials that other people have done to try to use those to treat my patients better. But I don't think I would be very good at designing a clinical trial.
And just one more statement about research. If you were given, let's say, thousands of dollars to fund research, what kind of research would it be?
So, the things that I think about every day are delivering care to people in a better way. And I think that the things that I would think about and the things that I am thinking about within my center is healthcare disparities, and having, I can deliver the same treatment to 5 different people and have different things happen to them. Some of that's because of their inherent differences and the way maybe they metabolize medicines. But I think I've increasingly realized that a lot of it has to do with the care that is completely out of my hands. Are they in an environment where they have enough food? Are they warm? Are they safe? Do they have support from their loved ones? That's something that a lot of people are looking at right now, because it does make such a big difference in the outcome of a lot of medical care. But I don't think that there's a lot of papers, if you look at healthcare disparities and outcomes, there's a lot of papers about that, why they're there. There's not a lot of papers about how to overcome them. How do you help people to, despite their circumstances, still do well with medical care? So if I had a lot of money to work on that, I would probably try to figure out programs that would help people change their life circumstances such that they would have a better result from treatments that other people smarter than me were designing for them to do.
So I think our final question here is just what is the day in the life of an oncologist like? Can you just kind of walk us through what you do every day?
Okay. So I get up really early. I exercise every day before I go to work, or else I can't sit still, and I'm a miserable person. So that's important to me. I eat a good breakfast, because everybody should. And then I see patients so I'm the managing physician now, so I have an admin role as well as a clinical role. So I see patients starting at 8 o'clock. I see a patient every 20 minutes. I have a break for lunch, and I finish at 5 o'clock. During the course of that time, like I said, I see a patient about every 20 minutes. In between that, I'm making phone calls, I'm looking things up. If a patient has results that were things that I wasn't expecting, I stay at work usually for about another hour to finish charting on the things that I've done that day. And then I look at, before I go home, I look ahead to my next day's clinic to make sure that if somebody is coming in and I don't have a good handle on what it is I need to do for them, that I look it up the day before. And then I usually do some more work before I go to bed. Again, getting ready for the next day's patients to make sure I know what what's coming up and what I need to do for them the next day. I do 2 days of administrative work where I work with the heads of my center to try to make sure that the care we're delivering is consistent and everybody has what they need to take care of patients, and listening to ways that we might be able to make things better in the future. So and we all work 4 days a week, which is very nice. I'm very privileged to be able to do that. So I have 2 days where I do admin and 2 days where I see patients from 8 to 5. And then once every couple of weeks, I am the hospital doctor, where I am on call from 8 o'clock Monday morning until 8 o'clock Friday morning, seeing all the patients in the hospital and taking care of people after hours. If they run into a problem when our clinic's no longer open, they call and wake me up and ask me questions.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Horenkamp, for your time and input. Your perspectives and experiences have been really interesting, and it was really great to learn from you. So we appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much.
No problem.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Stories Behind the Scrubs. If you haven't already listened to the last episode with antepartum nurse Kathy Lee, set aside some time to check that out. If you look forward to hearing when our next episode drops, click the subscribe button. We'd also like to give a shout out to Kat for designing our cover art. If you like the art, check out her animations by following Kat Productions Animation on Instagram, and be sure to follow our social media by going to Instagram and following Stories Behind the Scrubs.